I don't think I've ever in my whole life watched a movie where I cried harder. I ugly bawled.
Because it had a lot of outrage from people who, of course, hadn't seen it yet.
Right. It's a tricky story, the way they've told it.
See, I got through the whole thing without saying, so hot right now.
Welcome. This is the Fright Club podcast. We're back on Facebook Live.
Yes, we are.
That should be fun. We're looking forward to some great comments. Some very intelligent, insightful, not smart mouth comments at all.
I don't think you know our audience.
But welcome, as we are going to talk about the best so far in 2020, because this hit us a few weeks ago when we realized, oh my Lord, we're almost to the halfway point. And it's funny because when we first talked about it, we thought, oh, it hasn't been a very good year. But then we dug into it and found some good stuff.
Yeah, we actually thought about not doing this topic at
Yeah.
all because, the theater's closing and a lot of the big ones got moved. That made us wonder if there was going to be anything worth talking about. And then we looked into it, and there really were. And I think one of the reasons to do this is that I think a lot of people might have missed them.
Yeah, that is definitely true. And by the way, if I didn't say, she's Hope Madden.
He's George Wolf.
And we are from madwolf.com. Glad you're here for Fright Club Live as we count down the best of the year so far. And yeah, there were a lot you could call small movies, and especially with the theaters still not being open, it might be easier for a lot of things to fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
But there's definitely some good stuff
Yeah,
there.
actually, it's almost exclusively small movies because any of the, like Quiet Place sequel, any of the sort of really big Hollywood horror movies, they've just bumped. There were a couple that came out early that weren't very good, that were pretty bad, actually. But then there were a couple that hit the theaters early that we will still remember a little bit in this. But mainly what we're going to talk about are films, very small independent films that were released directly to streaming.
Yeah, because that's sort of just how the year went, and it's still going. But first off, we want to say a big thank you to Samantha Kuyesnik, who was our guest last time as we talked about grief in horror and found some really good stuff. And as we knew she would, she brought a lot of great insight, especially because at least a couple of those movies she had just watched the day before,
Right.
so it was very fresh.
Very fresh for her. And she did. She had some great insight into it. And if you don't know, if you didn't listen to the podcast, she, besides being a filmmaker, she just a couple of months ago released her first novella, and it's called True Crime, and it's amazing, and you should look it up. Grindhouse Press. It's really, really good.
Dark.
It's dark. It is. It's dark.
Yeah, but good stuff. So thank you.
And we did get some good feedback on that. And it's funny, one of the people, Rachel Willis, our own Rachel Willis, who writes for us at madwolf.com, her only quibble is that she would have put Nightingale higher on the list because she said she was just racked with sobs when that movie was over. That is a tough one.
It is a tough one, but so well done. And it really wears you out.
It does.
By the end of it. But it had to be on there. Grief is so much a part of it. It has other themes as well, as you very rightly pointed out.
Right.
But grief is a big one. Yeah,
it is. And then there were a couple of other comments of films that people would have liked us to at least touch on. Jen Drunful, she thought that maybe Pet Sematary could have been a runner-up. That's true. That whole film is really driven by, a parent's grief. And really sort of generational, how that affects everybody, grief, that's a good thought. Seth and Darren both thought that Pan's Labyrinth deserved to be considered, which I thought was very interesting. That's an interesting idea. And then Monty thought that the movie The Monster, he said, was very grievy. And I like that idea because I think it circles back to what Samantha said about you don't have to grieve what you've lost. You can grieve what you've never had. And I think that film, The Monster, really does that, particularly for the little girl. She just really never had a proper parent.
And also, I think both of us, when Monty said The Monster, both of us immediately thought of A Monster Calls, which is not a horror movie, but it is so sad.
It is, and
it will
it's very
rip your
driven,
heart out.
It is. It's driven by grief. And I don't think I've ever in my whole life watched a movie where I cried harder. I ugly bawled
but
whole
it's a
time.
Beautiful movie.
It is.
It really not a horror movie.
No,
but,
there's
man.
a monster in it. But it's not.
Liam
a
Neeson
horror
voiced
movie.
monster.
That's right.
But a beautiful movie. But no, those are good comments, and thanks to all the comments for that. Also, we want to thank Jamie and the gang from Fave 5 from Fans podcast. They gave us a really nice shout out in their latest, really interesting podcast episode.
Yeah, Jamie, if you don't listen to it, Fave 5 from Fans, Jamie has a different co-host on every time, and they talk about sort of each of their 5 favorite of something. Doesn't have to be a movie, doesn't have to be a horror movie. And in this last podcast, it was John Carpenter films, and his co-host had actually he had drawn a comic book series, an official Snake Plissken comic book series, and so has worked with John Carpenter and had a ton of incredibly nutty stories to share. So that was really great. But then the other thing I realized when I was looking that up, when I was listening to that, is that somehow we missed one, a fairly recent one, I think, but still we missed it, where Jamie's co-hosts are our friends, Phantom, Dark Dave, and Jen Dreadful. And I don't know how we missed that, but we will rectify that situation. I know I will probably when I run tomorrow. So
yeah, it was great because one of the basic rules of interviewing, anytime you have a good guest on, you want to get out of there with at least one good story.
Oh yeah, he has a ton.
And
he has a ton.
Yeah, a bunch of good stories. So thank you for all that.
Bed Bath and Beyond. That's a great. You're like, what? No, they have a great Bed Bath & Beyond story.
They do. A lot of star power going on in Bed Bath & Beyond. Spoiler alert, Adrienne Barbeau.
It's true.
Okay, that's all I'm going to say.
That's right.
Adrienne Barbeau. So thanks for all that, for the shout-outs and the response to the last podcast. So, but that brings us up to now. We're the middle of July. Holy moly, so much bad stuff going on. Let's focus on the good stuff. And the first 6 months of 2020. And it's weird because with all the bad of just the year in general, it's almost like you want to just fast forward. Let's get this year over with and hopefully move on. But we're going to look back because we did find a bunch of good stuff on the horror movie front. And we'll start out, before we actually get to the top 5, there were a bunch that just deserve mentioning, I think. Starting with Color Out of Space, which was Nicolas Cage meeting up with Lovecraft, which it had to happen. It's the love match that had to happen. And I think if you've listened to this podcast before, you know we're not the biggest Lovecraft fans in the world. No. But this one was one of my favorite renderings of Lovecraft because we have said it's tough because it's monsters and it's hard to bring them to life in a good way that translates on screen, but they do it well here.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of really good horror films that are sort of reminiscent of Lovecraftian, more than outright versions of his writings. And this, because the way he writes, he's always talking about it's a sound you can't possibly describe. Right. It's a color you've never seen before, which is hard to do when you actually see and hear. And I think that this movie does it incredibly well. And of course, Nicolas Cage, who's nutty, and that's always super fun. So that was a fun one. We also want to mention The Droving. It's an independent British horror film that came out this year, and we got a chance to talk to the director, George Popoff, who was great. And we really enjoyed this movie. It was really well put together. It looked incredible, which I think he's only 2 movies in, but I think that's something that's sort of his calling card now, is the way he uses natural light and settings. The performances are great, and so we really highly recommend, if you haven't got a chance to see The Droving, that you look that one up. Yeah,
and he was great on the podcast.
He was.
He just dove right in. He watched all the movies. Actually, he watched some that really he didn't have to, just to get some backstory, and he was great. So yeah, definitely check out The Droving. Also, Come to Daddy.
Yeah, Frodo Baggins gets nutty in this one. This is fun. I love so many people in this cast that I just really always love in everything. It took some weird turns. And I was talking to my sister about this movie because when Elijah Wood, if you were to run into Elijah Wood in real life, it would be hard not to go, yeah, you have the biggest eyes that I have ever seen. And it's funny because people actually mention it like 3 times in this movie. They say, well, you have really big eyes, which I appreciate because we always talk about that when The Rock is in a movie. And if he's not playing like a gargantuan human being, he's just playing like somebody's dad, you're like, no way. Somebody would have to go, damn, you're huge. So that's a tangent about Come to Daddy. But I enjoyed that movie. It was weird, but really, I thought, a lot of fun.
Another one that I'm really surprised didn't make the overall list here because you just went on and on about Blood Quantum.
If we'd have done fuzzy math, Blood Quantum would have been number 6. It was so much better than I anticipated. It was clearly a very low budget film. It felt very, timestamp felt very authentic. And I thought that it did an incredible job of telling a story that sometimes you think to yourself, who's going to tell you anything interesting about zombies? But it really, really did. I loved Blood Quantum. And that was a Shudder original. As
we've mentioned here recently, I think Shudder originals have been on the uptick here the last few weeks anyway.
I think so too.
They've had some ones that were definitely worth checking out. Also, Why Don't You Just Die, which we talked about a few times here on our different podcasts, because it's even more effective when you think about everything that happens is just in one room.
Yeah, it really is. It's an action movie.
Yeah.
And it's action-packed. And they never leave this man's apartment, which is just insane. Almost the entire film is shot inside the living room of one apartment. It's not a horror movie. It's an action movie that's incredibly, tremendously violent and bloody. So it's definitely a genre picture. But since it is not horror, it didn't make the final list. But endlessly fun to watch is Why Don't You Just Die! !
Mm-hmm. And also one more, and this might have been mine if it was fuzzy math, or even if we could have done a 5B or whatever, but The Hunt.
Yeah.
I really, really enjoyed. And this one, if you remember, this was right on, it came out, I think, the week of lockdown.
Yeah.
And it just suffered that way because it had a lot of buzz, because it had a lot of outrage from people who, of course, hadn't seen it yet.
Right.
But then the lockdown hit, and it's
funny because it suffered twice.
Yeah.
Because it was supposed to have been released several months before that, but it was scrapped by the studio because of an open shooter, one of the many from 2019, situations. They decided it was too violent to release, which it came out. I mean, the Rambo: Last Blood came out that same week, so I don't believe that was really the reason they scrapped it. And it's funny because it's a very polarizing film, I think, because first of all, sort of the hard right folks didn't want to see it because they didn't want to see conservatives being victimized in this way, made out to seem like they're stupid. But liberals didn't like it either because the movie does not take sides. It makes both sides out to be sort of equally idiotic in the way that they are focusing on just competing with one another and not on being good human beings. And in doing that, they're basically serving a different purpose, which is to say the people with a lot of money get away with a lot of shit, and everybody who doesn't have money is just fighting amongst themselves.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It reveled in its B-movie exploitative nature.
Yeah.
Betty Gilpin was freaking great.
She was great. She was so good.
Yeah, so I was really sorry to see that one kind of get passed over a little bit. That was good and bloody, too, and it threw you some curveballs because, without spoiling anything, there were some people in the cast that you thought would live longer than they did. And anytime that happens, like, so now we don't know what's going to happen. So really enjoyed The Hunt. So all of those are worth checking out, a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Just goes to show you how many we did find once we got into this and started looking at the first half of 2020. But let's get to it, the ones that actually made our top 5. And this first one is from, obviously, I'm used to saying from what year they're from. Duh, they're all from this year. And it's Leigh Whannell's remake of, or reimagining of The Invisible Man.
What happened to him?
He cut his wrist. Per his final wishes, you're getting $5 million. Contingent, of course, on the fine print. He can't be ruled to be mentally incompetent.
It just doesn't make any sense.
What?
Adrian wouldn't kill himself.
Listen, you're getting your freedom back, okay? Don't let him haunt you.
Hello? He said that wherever I went, he would find me. Walk right up to me, and I wouldn't be able to see him. I went to his house today. He's not dead. I'm not crazy.
Talk about a B movie, something that really embraces its sort of B movie history. This one really does, and it is elevated in every single scene by the absolutely magnificent Elisabeth Moss.
Well, on that vein, Whannell was quoted as saying that he has worked with some extremely talented actors before, but, quote, working with Elisabeth Moss was just a revelation. She can do anything.
Yeah, we've been saying that for I don't know how long.
Yes, and one of the main things we said, and one of the things that struck us when we saw the movie, was how it starts out knowing that she is a battered partner, but you never see it. It's only through her performance that you believe it.
Yeah.
And Whannell has said that was only possible because of how good she is at conveying emotions without dialogue.
Yeah.
And you totally believe it.
Yeah,
and if you don't believe it, then that wrecks the whole movie. You have to believe she has that history, even though you're just dropped in the middle
you
of
can
it.
see her. She's broken.
Yeah.
She has PTSD. She's broken. She's afraid of everything. She distrusts her own thoughts and decision making. And her performance is absolutely stunning. And one of the movies that we're not going to talk about today actually is Shirley, which, I've seen has made a lot of other people's similar lists, but, it is a great movie. It made our list of the best films of 2020, the first half of 2020, but I don't consider Shirley Jackson a horror writer, and I definitely don't consider the film Shirley a horror film.
Not at all.
So that's the only reason. I mean, otherwise it would definitely be on here because we both loved it.
Yeah.
And recommend it highly, but it's just not a horror movie
And
at
it's
all.
great. The reimagining of this is great. The way that they turn it into a, for lack of a better phrase, Me Too type of moment in making the Invisible Man is really not the main character here.
Right.
She is, and her journey, her arc, her revenge, and there's a mystery too. Obviously, how he is turning invisible, which I really liked.
Agreed. Agreed.
I really liked, and I also found out I don't know this. I didn't know that much about biology, but for the people that do, one of the sticking points of the original movie was that, biologically speaking, if all the cells in a person were see-through, then you would not be able to see. So in this case, because it's a suit, it solves that. Yeah, that wasn't bothering us.
No, it really wasn't.
But I'm glad they cleared that up.
One of the things that I think, it's not as if The Invisible Man has been made 300 times. I mean, if you're going to make a Dracula film, for example, which they are going to do, that's tough to do and find a new avenue. But even so, even though we haven't seen The Invisible Man all that many times, when you do see it, of course, you just focus on the man and how you lose who you are as a human being if you don't see yourself, and how you could become morally bankrupt and do things you shouldn't do, and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of tedious and tiresome by this point. I loved this approach to it.
I did. I did too.
And of course, but again, I mean, it doesn't work without Elizabeth Moss.
And it had some good visuals to it. It also had some good jump scares, which are few and far between for me.
You're quite a stickler about
one
jump scares.
Really good one.
Yeah.
And also, to be fair, it did have some logic
leaps.
Leaps.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. Some leaps of logic. But in the end, it was so much fun and so refreshingly new take on one of these classic monsters that we just loved it. And yeah, Elizabeth Moss just puts it over the top because she is phenomenal.
Push over the cliff.
Over the cliff. And that is number 5 on our list of the best horror from so far this year. Moving up to number 4, this is one of those smaller ones that might have slipped through for a lot of people, but so effective. It's a girl born into an all-female cult led by a man in their compound, beginning to question his teachings and her own reality. This one's called The Other Lamb.
Let us pray.
My wives, you all came to me broken by a cruel world. I took every one of you in. I sacrificed my life for you. I gave you daughters and sisterhood and life.
Let us reflect on our blessings.
Yes, my shepherd. You think that because you haven't had your time yet, that makes you special. Prepare yourself, child. Our great shepherd won't be so sweet on you then. I'll be seeing you when the blood comes to you.
This was a mesmerizing movie and very, very unlike anything I've seen in a really, really long time, if ever. It was so poetically filmed. Mm-hmm. It was so beautifully filmed, and it just dropped you into a fully existing world that is outside of your own world. I mean, there wasn't a lot of exposition. They didn't take a lot of time to explain to you what was going on here, but you knew that there was a guy they called Shepherd, and then there was just these rings of females of differing ages. You pretty quickly figured out what was going on there, and it was it's a coming of age tale is what it is, and it's a movie that looks at how awkward it can be for a female to come of age, for your first menstrual period, for every awkward thing, and the movie says, own it. Don't let somebody else tell you what it's supposed to be like. Don't feel any shame about it. This is you, be you. And it does it without preaching or without sort of beating you about the head with it. And it's violent when it needs to be. It is ugly and mean when it needs to be. It's gorgeous.
It really is. End. We should. I'm going to butcher the name of this director unless you want to take a stab at it. Małgorzata Smuzalska. All right, we're going to go with that. Working again with cinematographer Michael Endlert. They've worked together before. It looks.
She's a Polish filmmaker. She's made a lot of movies. I think this might be her first English language film.
And it does. It looks fantastic. It's spellbinding from the beginning. You feel like you're in certainly another, not maybe another world, but another place in the world.
Yeah.
Very, very remote. They're a cult. They're off by themselves and following this shepherd. And it's it's a slow burn that leads you somewhere. In a way, you think you know where it's going, but you probably don't.
No.
But when you get there, it's really satisfying in a very, oh my sort of way.
Yeah.
Very satisfying, yeah.
Yeah. That's because that's exactly how I felt about it. There, it comes to certain points in the film where they could go one way or the other, and where most films you've seen would go one way and they go the other. And in the end, it's like, well, you think to yourself, well, you've painted yourself in a corner because there's no way you can, And I agree. I think satisfying is exactly what it is.
And we have to mention the lead performance
Raffi Cassidy.
Raffi Cassidy, you may have seen in Vox Lux or Killing of a Sacred Deer. She's great.
She is great. And she's so stunning. She's so beautiful. And this movie also lets her sort of be monstrous at times. And it really goes back and forth between this, because she really is. She's just a stunning, sort of exquisite beauty. But then for her to just sort of oscillate between that and this rage and the sort of monstrousness that comes with it, it's a fascinating movie.
It really is. The Other Lamb. That takes us up to number 3, best of the year so far on Fright Club Live. And this is a long time ago in a distant fairy tale countryside. A young girl leads her little brother into a dark wood in desperate search of food and work, only to stumble upon a nexus of terrifying evil, Gretel and Hansel.
Tell me the fairy tale again.
It's too scary, and you'll start seeing things that aren't there. I'm hungry.
I'm hungrier than you are.
Because you're a pig.
Look! It smells of cake!
Careful with that, dear. I'd hate for you to start something you can't stop.
Pleased to make your acquaintance. I'm called Gretel, and this rough one here is my brother Hansel. There's something wrong here.
But it's so pleasant.
Where are all the animals? From where does she draw milk?
Now, I saw this first and you saw it after.
Yeah.
What did you think?
I really loved it. I had heard, I knew Oz Perkins was the director, and I'd seen his work before, and I just kept hearing from you and other people about what a visual wonder it is. And boy, it did not disappoint in that way. It's so gorgeous visually. And, well, to be frank, I had heard a lot about it.
You're right. Yeah.
But I really enjoyed it. It was satisfying in the way that, again, sort of in a similar way that Invisible Man takes a new twist on an old story.
Sure.
This is, of course, a classic fairy tale, but it's certainly a new twist because, obviously, putting Gretel is in the first position, it's her story.
Right.
And he changes, Osgood Perkins changes the ages a little bit of the kids to make it even more of the fact that she's in charge. She, Gretel, is almost like a mother figure in a certain way, leading him along, and then is he hampering her moving forward and coming of age?
Yeah.
And then, of course, they come upon the witch. And I thought it was fascinating. A small cast, well done all around, and visually glorious.
Yeah. Well, Oz Perkins, he really does have a way with visual storytelling, as we know from The Black Coat's Daughter in particular.
Yeah.
And also, to a lesser degree, I'm the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House. He didn't write this one, but again, I think he just casts a spell, and that is so effective for this particular movie, for this particular kind of movie. I was really surprised, to be honest with you. It shocked me in watching it that 2 men, at 3 really, if you count the cinematographer, were responsible for this, the writer, director, and the person who lends the film, because it is a feminist film.
Yeah, Rob Hayes is the writer.
Is the writer. And it is a coming-of-age story. And Sophia Lilith from It, she plays Gretel. She is great. It's a tricky story, the way they've told it. And I thought that they made some really risky narrative decisions that I was all for. I thought it was just really fascinating. And spooky. It was spooky all the way throughout.
Very spooky. And got to give a shout-out to Alice Krige,
who
plays the witch, because she is spooky and menacing, and what's great is, as she's being so nice and so welcoming, you know it's not right, and Gretel knows it's not right, and you can tell it's slowly dawning on her. Of course, course, Hansel is all about it,
right?
Because he has everything he wants to eat,
right?
But Gretel knows something's not right here.
But it's also, I think, the slow shift as the two children kind of switch places is really was really sort of incredibly creepy. I found it really very, very creepy. I love the payoff.
Yeah.
I love the way it works out. I love Alex Krieg's cheekbones. She's so
cut
great.
Glass, won't they?
I know. She's so great in this. And I think, to me, it let me down just slightly in the very last scene where there's kind of a disconnect between the tone of the voiceover and the tone of what we're seeing on screen. And I don't know if it just flew over my head or if I thought that they hadn't really sort of made a decision that they needed to make artistically. I don't know. But that's really, I think, the only place in the film that I was let down.
I thought it was really satisfying. And again, Mark's Oz Perkins. That's 3 now working as a genre filmmaker. And if he's going to stay there, that's fine.
Yeah.
But he's one of those where I want to see where he's going.
Yep.
Will he get back to writing? I imagine he will. But this one tells a great story, a new twist on a great story.
Yeah.
So Gretel and Hansel. And see, I got through the whole thing without saying, so hot right now.
You didn't, though, because...
No, I did.
You didn't. He didn't.
That's number 3 on our list. But it is hot right now. It was like 90 today.
It is hot right now.
So moving up to number 2, a soon-to-be stepmom is snowed in with her fiancé's 2 children at a remote holiday village. Just as relations begin to thaw between the trio, some strange and frightening events take place. This is The Lodge.
How would you feel about going to the mountains for Christmas with Grace? She really wants to get to know you guys. You okay? I don't want to leave you here with the kids if you're not feeling up to it.
I'm feeling fine. It was my idea, and it took a couple days. I can do a couple days.
What has happened?
It's Grace.
Everyone committed suicide except for her.
Repent, and you will find salvation.
Guys! Things are very uncomfortable between us, and we're stuck in a house together. What is this? The power's out. Where are my things? It makes no sense. What?
I heard something.
Repent. Repent your sins.
The Lodge is one we got to see last year at Nightmares Film Festival.
Yes.
It was one we had really been looking forward to. And it didn't let us down. It was great.
Yeah.
As much as sometimes, and you know this, if it's not wintertime and I see a movie with a bunch of snow,
you get all mad.
And it was October, so we were getting there.
That's right.
But it creates that great sense of helplessness, of they're not going anywhere. Yeah. And of course, that becomes more important as the story goes on. But it also gives us a totally clueless dude.
Oh my God,
as far as, hey, let's all get together and share a nice family moment. This guy.
What an idiot.
I know it has to happen because it propels the story, but yeah, I bet kids, you'll love to spend some time with your soon-to-be stepmom.
Yeah.
No, they won't.
No. The dumbest, the most clueless dad ever.
Idiot. And then he just takes off.
What did you think was going to happen? Nothing good. But it's the follow-up from Severin Fiala and Veronica Franz, who did Goodnight Mommy.
Yeah.
And so I think more than anything, that's what I was looking forward to. I just wanted to see where they were going to go with this. But also the cast is great, right? So Riley Keough, who's just riding high. She has done, I don't think she's done any bad work. She's been in a couple movies that work great, but she seems to always be great in them.
And by the way, we should mention, we just heard Riley Keough's brother just passed away, apparently of suicide, just terrible. So that kind of felt like I had to mention it. So that's just a horrible situation. Because their father is also in this movie.
Yes.
The small part, Danny Keough.
Yeah, Danny Keough is in the movie as the cult leader in the sort of videotape flashbacks.
But anyway.
So it's not just her, though, also Jaden Martell.
Oh, yes.
From It and from just 1,000 other movies.
So great.
He looks just like our next-door neighbor, Everest. So I have had a soft spot for this boy since he was very small.
He really does.
I love him so much. But it helps that he's always really good in everything.
He's really good.
He's so good in this movie. He's really the conscience at the center of this film. And he's so torn. But one of the things that I appreciated about the film is that it's an isolated winter death movie. And so they embrace that.
They
do. They embrace
really
that. They make it clear. They're like, we know what came before us. We know you're thinking about The Shining, and you're thinking about It, or The Thing, excuse me, and you're thinking about all these other white death movies.
And so are they.
Yeah.
Because one of the movies watched by the trio, The Thing.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the dog's name is Grady.
Right.
So yeah, they know it.
Oh, yeah.
You're thinking it. They're thinking it. Let's just own it. And it delivers because of the dread, the slow dread that you feel. And also it has some of that what's real and what's not about it. But it doesn't, it's not lazy about it.
No.
Which movies can be, I think.
Yeah.
Especially with I just woke up from a dream.
Oh, we hate that.
I've seen a lot of that lately.
Yeah.
I watched another movie last night that had it in it. So enough of that. But there's not that fallback, that get out of jail free card here.
No. It builds to some climactic moments that really feel like a slap. I mean, I think partly because of the age of a lot of the people involved in the story, partly, I mean, I just really think you might be expecting it to take a different turn than it does.
Mm-hmm.
And it delivers. It delivers on a really dreadful promise.
Yeah, and if you remember headlines from years ago, you'll probably notice that there's a cult involved here in Grace's, Riley Keough's character's past that's probably based on the cult of Heaven's Gate from years ago. But we're certainly not going to spoil anything for anybody that didn't see the movie. But we really thought it was effective.
Yes.
And definitely worth checking out. The Lodge, number 2 on our list of best horror of half the year. And that brings us up to number 1. This is another one that we saw at
Nightmares Film Festival.
I'll tell you what, people.
They know what they're doing.
Put it on your calendar. They do. This one, a newly pregnant housewife finds herself increasingly compelled to consume dangerous objects. As her husband and his family tighten their control over her life, she must confront the dark secret behind her new obsession. It's called Swallow.
So what did you do for money before you met my son?
Retail, mostly.
A lucky break.
I'm just real grateful.
How does it make you feel when you swallow something?
I just like the textures in my mouth. It made me feel in control. I just wanted to make you happy.
You get back here with my kid!
I did something unexpected today.
This is another movie that I couldn't believe, to be honest with you, was written and directed by a man.
Yeah.
Hats off to you.
Yeah, but also hats off to Haley Bennett, who she's the lead here, but she also is an executive producer here, and I think had a lot to do with getting this thing to the screen. But you're right about the male involved, but she drives the film. Her performance is fantastic.
It is.
She makes you, even though as you're very curious about why is she doing this, and it's a real affliction, I guess. It's either called pica or pica. I don't know, so I'll say both.
Yeah.
Of swallowing these weird objects, but she makes her character sympathetic. At the same time, you just can't believe she's doing it. But then, as it becomes a battle of control of her life, it's resonant in that way, in terms of taking control of her own life in many different ways because of the predicament that she's in with her husband and her husband's family.
Right. So it's Carlo Mirabella Davis is the writer-director who did this. I think that besides the really powerful story that he's telling and the tremendous performance that Bennett delivers, the film has such an eerily perfect look about it, especially, like the first half of the film when she's sort of nesting and being a homemaker, and
she's so lucky. She's so lucky.
She feels really
keeps
blessed.
saying, really
she
blessed.
feels really blessed.
# blessed.
Yeah. It's the way it looks, in a lot of cases it looks like a Hitchcock film.
Mm-hmm.
And I think rightfully so, although in a lot of ways what it does is turn sort of the idea of his perfect blonde on ear, right? I mean, it really subverts that notion and it puts all of the agency with her. It takes her a while to figure out what the she should be doing with this agency because swallowing thumbtacks isn't a great idea. But it's such a powerful, evocative notion that that's what she's doing, particularly right now at this moment in her life, that this is how she takes control of her life. And that she, there's a scene in the movie where she kind of applauds herself quietly to her husband, I did something different today, and I'm pretty proud of myself. And then he was like, what did you do? And she couldn't say. She's like, I bought new blinds. It's such a unnerving film, much more than it is a horror movie.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Hitchcock though, because specifically I would say Marnie.
Yeah.
If you remember Marnie and a different way of treating the quote-unquote hysterical woman.
Right.
Really came to mind in watching this movie. And you're right, I love that scene, and I love the evolution of her husband, and so his true nature coming out farther and farther down the line. And of course, the more that they try to tighten their control over her, both her husband and her husband's parents, the more she slips away and the more she has to do anything to control her own life.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. It's a fascinating study. Yes, maybe not horrific in the way, it's certainly not a slasher movie or anything like that, but there's horrific things involved in it.
It's so unnerving.
Very unnerving.
It's so unnerving. And it's another one where I really think the payoff I found to be very satisfying.
Agreed. And that's why it's number one for half the year for horror in 2020. So we know there are some long-awaited horror movies in the pipeline for the rest of the year. Whether they get here or not, remains to be seen. So what we're going to have for the rest of the year, who knows?
Indeed.
We've got some that we hope so. We've got some that we just heard about today might be pushed to 2021, but that's not in stone yet either. So we just don't know, but hopefully we'll have some more good stuff and have a brand new top 5 or more by the end of the year. But that's it for half the year. So I wish I could say I knew what you thought, but I still couldn't figure out these comments. And I know you're laughing. Usually it hasn't done this before. Usually I see the comments just fine, but I didn't this time. So I know they're great, but we just didn't get a chance to see them tonight. But thank you so much for stopping by and for being a part of it as always. But we look ahead. We've already got the next Fright Club podcast set with a special guest, and this should be fun.
Yes, I think it will be a fun one. Katie Glidewell, also known as the Blonde in Front. She's going to join us, and we are going to count down a mess of blondes in horror.
What else?
We're going to talk about a whole bunch of blondes in horror.
What else are we going to talk about with the Blonde in Front?
That's right.
Blondes in horror. And yeah, there's a bunch to talk about, that'll be tough to narrow down. So that'll be the next in-studio Fright Club. Still, as far as Fright Club Live for the August edition, don't know. Of course, we certainly hope to be back in front of a live audience at Gateway Film Center, but we just have no idea, so we'll keep you updated.
We do have a backup plan if we can't get in. Because the thing is, if we do get in, we don't know which film Chris Hamill is going to be able to get at a short notice. So we still can't tell you what the podcast is going to be. However, if they're not open in time, we know what podcast we're going to do on Fright Club Live, probably Facebook Live again, is sound design.
Ooh.
It's my gift to you, my love.
Nice.
We're going to do the best sound design in horror.
Love that. And hopefully, if we are on Facebook Live, I will have figured out the comments. They might have. Was there an update? I didn't get the memo. Something happened. A new button in this.
I can't be to blame. I only do Twitter. This is not my bag.
Sound design, though, that'll be fantastic.
I know.
Wait.
I know.
To dig into that. And of course, we'd love your suggestions for any of these.
Especially you, Katie, because you seem to have the best ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Pun of Joe, specifically. The rest of you, whatever. But
exactly.
Pun of Joe.
Keep them coming as always. Best way to keep the conversation going with us as always. On Twitter, we're at Fright Club Pod. Also on Facebook with comments sometimes. And Instagram, it's Mad Wolf Columbus, and the main website where you can get all of our written reviews. Our other weekly podcast on all the new releases, regardless of genre, called The Screening Room. That's all at madwolf.com. So, again, thanks so much. I've seen some great numbers pop up as far as who was stopping by and being a part of this. Can't thank you enough. Love it. Love doing it.
You know what, though? We want to thank Seth again, because you do such a nice job of promoting us for us.
He does.
I know. He's awesome.
Yeah, that is. Thank you, Seth. Really, really appreciate that. You always help us get the word out, which is much appreciated. So until next time, thanks again for stopping by. She is Hope Madden.
He's George Wolf.
And this is the Fright Club Podcast.
Hello, darling. This is Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. And stay frightful, my friend.